Welcome to World History Lesson 13. Japanese Empire. Our lesson objectives are: understand the broad history of Japan, identify elements of Japanese culture and beliefs, understand how foreign cultures influenced Japan, identify Japanese contributions to the world. Japan is a small group of islands, or an archipelago, located 100 miles off the Asian mainland and 500 miles from mainland China. In addition to 4 main islands, Japan includes over 3,000 smaller islands. As an island nation, the surrounding seas and ocean have protected and isolated Japan from outside hostile influences and invasion. Japan is close enough to the Asian mainland to be influenced by the Koreans or Chinese, but it was also too far away for the Chinese to conquer. Over 3/4 of the land area of Japan is mountainous, with only 1/5 of the land suitable for farming. Japanese farmers must make the most of the limited arable or farmable land, which would increase their value to the Japanese people. The Japanese had to overcome the scarcity of farmland by harvesting the fish from the surrounding seas. Natural disasters affect Japanese culture. Forces of nature have had a major impact on Japan's history and culture. Earthquakes shake the islands, and violent winds known as typhoons or tropical hurricanes have destroyed its cities. Huge tidal waves caused by earthquakes have also pounded Japan's shores and ports. Japan also has 30 active volcanoes that could erupt with little warning. The Shinto religion was originally based on the belief that the royal families was descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu Amikami. The Shinto religion grew out of the Japanese respect for and fear of the forces of nature and land. Shintoism followers believe that spirits are found in all parts of nature, such as rivers, mountains, and winds. Followers of Shintoism pray to the spirits that control the forces of nature, respect their ancestors, and are expected to be loyal to their family and nation. History of Japan. In 200 BC, when the Chinese were building the Great Wall of China, the Japanese were nomadic hunters. The Japanese people were primitive but would look to China and see how their lives could be improved. Japanese leaders adopted the ideas and ways of the more advanced civilization of Japan. During the 7th century AD, the Japanese sent representatives to China to learn about the Chinese civilization. When the representatives returned to Japan, they brought with them Chinese knowledge in the fields of philosophy, religion, art, written language, and government. The Japanese had developed their own culture, but these new ideas heavily influenced the emerging Japanese identity and culture. A major religious belief also came to Japan from China: Buddhism, which originated in India, spread to China, and eventually came to Japan. Like the Chinese, the Japanese absorbed their new faith into their culture, and Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines could be found throughout Japan. The feudal period. Society in Japan during the Japanese Middle Ages were organized into a rigid class system, much like European feudalism during the Middle Ages. The job and role people had depended on the social class into which they were born. People were not allowed to advance from one social class to another. Japanese feudalism was very similar to European feudalism. The highest social class consisted of noble or feudal lords who were wealthy landowners. They socialized at the emperor's palace, but they did not have very much actual power. The next highest class was the samurai, who were land-owning warrior class. The last class was the lowest class, the peasants. Social class was so important that the type of clothing worn was dependent upon one's social class. Regardless of one's social class, the father was the head of the family. In feudal Japan, the shogun or general was the most powerful feudal lord. The shogun was a ruler of the armies and was appointed by the emperor to govern the country as a whole. The emperor had very little power during the Middle Ages in Japan. The emperor did little more than serve as religious leader and a symbol of Japanese unity. The leader of the most powerful family in Japan, the shogun, had all of the real power. The shogunate, or military government, was run by the ruling shogun. The Japanese warrior. The most powerful landowner warriors in the countryside were called samurai, and the most powerful samurai were called daimyo, meaning great name. Like the knights of feudal Europe, samurai pledged their loyalty and military service to their daimyo. Peasants farmed the daimyo's land, and in return the daimyo protected the farmers. The code of conduct of the samurai, called Bushido, was created in the 12th century in Japan. Bushido means way of the warrior and was used to control the samurai. Bushido dictated how the samurai dressed, spoke, talked, ate, married, and even died. Samurai were taught that their greatest honor was to defend their lords and each other. If necessary, they were expected to die for their lord. The Code of Bushido stressed following a strict code of honor, bravery, self-discipline, and loyalty. Every samurai wore armor, and their chief possession was their sword. Samurai were also trained to fight on horseback with their bows, arrows, and swords. If a samurai was dishonored or defeated dishonorably, he was expected to commit seppuku, or ritual suicide. In 1274 and again in 1281, the Mongolians tried to invade Japan. When a typhoon destroyed the Mongolian war fleet, the Japanese believed it was sent by the gods to destroy their enemies. The Japanese called these winds kamikaze, or the divine wind. The heavy cost of defending themselves against the Mongolian invasions weakened the feudal system in Japan. In the 14th century, the shogun was overthrown. Succeeding rulers were weaker and unable to rule the entire country of Japan, and rival feudal lords fought with each other over control of Japan. There was almost constant disorder and warfare during the feudal period. Fun fact: samurai is a masculine term, but female samurai are recorded to have existed. While research on this continues, more and more evidence has been discovered of female samurai warriors. History also records that samurai from outside of Japan did exist. There are records of 4 Westerners being inducted into the samurai war class: William Adams, Eugene Kolashi, Edward Schnell, and Jan Justin van Logenstein. Europeans reached Japan. In the mid-1500s, European ships arrived in Japan while rival feudal armies were constantly at war. Some daimyo welcomed the Portuguese traders and missionaries into their country, while others did not. Contact with the Europeans brought Christianity to Japan, but it also introduced the Japanese to European guns. European missionaries spread their new religion throughout the country. Japanese craftsmen also learned how to make guns of their own. Many shoguns feared that foreign influence in Japan would be a threat to their power. Because of the growing influence of the Chinese missionaries in Japan, the government decided to ban Christianity in Japan. Christians were often arrested, tortured, and executed in order to eliminate their growing power. Eventually, Japan decided to heavily limit trade with Europeans. The Japanese people could no longer travel abroad or build ocean-going ships in order to limit their outside influence. From this time until the 1800s, the Japanese kept foreign influences out of Japan through their laws. Japan was kept apart from cultural developments that were influencing the rest of the world. Because of this policy of isolation, Japan fell far behind the rest of the world in technology and sciences. Japanese years of isolationism. During the years of Japanese isolation, Japan experienced a long period of peace and stability. A form of Buddhism in Japan called Zen Buddhism had a big influence on Japanese culture. Followers of Zen Buddhism believed they could achieve spiritual enlightenment through meditation and strict discipline of their mind and body. Japanese artists followed a style of painting and emphasized a love of nature and meditation. The Japanese culture that grew during Japan's period of isolation had a lasting influence on its history. For 200 years, Japan developed its own distinctive culture with little foreign influence. Contributions to civilization. One of the world's most famous novels of this period is the 11th century tale of Genji by Lady Muraski. The tale of Genji tells of a legendary prince and many romances and is considered the world's first novel. Another important and popular form of Japanese writing was poetry, such as tanka and haiku. The tanka is a 5-line poem with a set of pattern of syllables on such subjects as love, nature, and pride in country. The haiku has a traditional Japanese verse form consisting of 3 lines with 5, 7, and 5 syllables. A typical haiku uses an image, often drawn from nature, to bring out a mood or feeling. The No drama developed in Japan. These plays were performed on a square, wooden stage without scenery by two main characters, with poetic passages chanted by a chorus. These ancient plays are still performed today. The 1600s saw the beginning of puppet theaters and a new form of drama called kabuki. Kabuki included comedies or melodramas with themes of family or historical events and could run from morning till night. Kabuki kept the attention of the audience through its stories, music, and dance. Musical theater remains a popular art form in many cultures today. Another glory of Japan was its paintings. Beautiful landscape, action-packed scenes of battle, and humorous drawings of people and animals were the chief subjects. Many were painted on scrolls. Some were 15 feet or 15.6 meters long. Three other Japanese arts that were perfected were flower arrangement, tea ceremonies or chanuyu, and landscape gardening. The tea ceremony followed a precise series of rituals that could take up to 4 hours. The Japanese also created distinctive home and family customs. Japanese homes and furnishings were simple. Floors were covered with straw mats and were protected by the custom of taking off sandals and clogs before entering a house. The Japanese built one-story homes able to withstand the earthquakes that frequently occurred. They made sliding panels of heavy paper on wooden frames to make rooms either smaller or larger. The heat came from a large earthenware pot, the hibachi. Houses had large tubs for very hot water, and whether rich or poor, everyone bathed daily. People washed thoroughly before entering the tub because the bath was mainly for relaxation. What's next? Take the time to go back and review the lesson on your own. After your review, complete the lesson review for the lesson and submit for grading. Remember, your submission should follow all the rules for standard written English. All submissions must be written in your own words and sources used cited at the end. How to cite sources in APA format. When you reference a source within an APA-style paper, whether it is using a direct quote, repurposing an image, or simply referring to an idea or theory, you should insert an in-text citation, the author's surname, and the date of publication within parentheses, straight after a direct quote. The URL citationmachine.net will assist you in creating citations.